Good morning. So I got some feedback from my last series about living with bipolar and ADHD, and I got some feedback stating that I talked a lot more about the ADHD part than the bipolar part. I'm sorry. I'm like I'm at my grandma's house, and I'm in this very comfy chair, but I do not have very good lighting, so I look special. Anyway, so I wanted to touch quickly on more of the bipolar side and kind of get more into that. So, as I stated in the last video series, I was diagnosed as having bipolar 1 when I was in my 20s, or very early 20s. I I'd say probably from the age of like 16, 17 is probably when the symptoms really started to manifest, I guess. And I was just kind of seen as a, unruly teenager or whatever. And, um, I really struggled. I struggled all through school, which I shared before too. And so when I was in high school and I was really struggling, my parents thought, I needed to get back on my ADHD medication. Um, and but in order to do that, I had to take it like once in the morning, and then during lunch I had to go stand in line at the nurse's office at school. And I didn't want to spend my whole lunch period doing that. I just didn't. I wouldn't do it. But anyway, uh, so so I was diagnosed as having bipolar 1. Um, Again, in my early 20s. We played with and tried many different medications, but they were all like antidepressants only. It wasn't until I'd say like my mid 20s that I finally saw someone who put me on actual like bipolar medication. But even then, in my 20s, like I had struggled with self esteem my whole life, and I my 20s were just not a fun time. I tried really hard to make them a fun time. Sometimes I had too much fun, but I made like a lot of just very poor decision making, like no thought for consequences at all. Um, Promiscuity, all these things that are very common for people with bipolar, especially bipolar 1, because our manic episodes are much more, they're bigger and a bit louder and longer. Um, and so I don't know how, and I'm very thankful that I managed to get through my 20s without any permanent damage other than a lot of guilt and shame and things like that I had to deal with, and I dealt with later down the road. um, and then I stopped taking my medication, and um, I and I worked in full time ministry for I think like 8 or 9 years, and there was always like this, and I think just in the church body in general, um, there there seems to be this stigma with mental health issues. Um, I myself felt that a lot, especially working in full time ministry, and I was working with women who were coming out of addiction. I myself am a former addict. I've actually been clean for like since, excuse me, like June 26, 2008. That's my date. Still clean. Woo! And I had been arrested actually because of my addiction, and I wanted help. I just didn't, and so I took this opportunity. I requested to be court ordered into this faith based residential program that was a year long. Um, it took me longer than a year. I ended up being there for, I think, almost 14 months. Um, I was stubborn. Excuse me. And during that time, like when I first got there, I got back on my bipolar medications, and like the first day, because I took them at night, and then the next day, like I I was so completely just like I felt like I was drugged, and I remember they still made me go to work, and I just remember crying like the whole way because like I was just like I could barely keep my eyes open. Like, it was really bad, and so I hated it, and so I didn't take anything after that. And I did deal with a lot of my issue, that led to the addiction. Um, and, I dealt with a lot of the things that I had done in my 20s that I was still carrying, a lot of shame and guilt over. And, and so, and just, I think getting older and like maturing, uh, also helped. I know that, and again, this is my personal experience. Everybody's different, so please don't compare your experience to my experience. Um, I mean, I remember like being in this program, and like some of the people like they had been through absolute hell, you know, and like I for a while felt like my testimony like wasn't like I mean, I don't know. I mean, like I grew up, my childhood was good. It was normal. I didn't have any traumatic events happen to me, at least that weren't self-inflicted. As I you know my late teens, early like I said, in my 20s. But anyway, so you can't compare your experiences with anybody else's. And But anyway, and so I think just dealing with a lot of that stuff definitely helped. And so, but like I said, there was always like this stigma that, you know, like if you admitted you had mental health issues, or like you weren't trusting God enough, or you weren't praying hard enough to be healed, or and all these things, and so I went unmedicated for a really long time. I did okay for a while, but as anyone with bipolar knows, like you can't maintain forever. Like at some point it's gonna come out. And even on the ADHD side, like during this time, like I wasn't taking any medication for anything. um, and it really became a big issue when I became program manager of a women and children's residential center, and which I loved, but there was so much to do. Like I had so many responsibilities, and I think with nonprofits in general, you're always understaffed, and but there was like I was in charge of so much, and it was impossible for one person to do all of that, and then beyond that, my director at the time, who was the one right above me, she utilized me a lot for a lot of the things that she had to do, because she was more in charge of like fundraising, and she was technically like over the center, but I was the one who actually was running the center like on a day-to-day basis. And I was in charge of, all the staff schedules, the student schedules, the kid schedules. I was in charge of like all the administration part, the student like money accounts, food stamp accounts, like all that, plus, build the building maintenance, and the vehicle like it was so much. And I just, and that was where I really hit a wall. And um and that was when I got back on my ADHD medication. And but even then, like, you know it was still too much. Like, and that, I had a lot of issues with this particular ministry. It was both a blessing and a curse at times, and that can probably be said with most ministries. So, but and I've always been like kind of and that's why, like, like on YouTube, I kind of made a funny meme, and which is like my little profile picture, which is, that I'm a black sheep Christian. I'm not like the other Christians because I'm very libertarian in my views. And I just don't think it's, you know, my place to judge anybody. Like, or to tell somebody that, what they're doing is wrong or sin, or, because, I just, I go by, what Jesus said. And, the two greatest commandments was to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. And I've always been that person, or have tried to be that person, and to just love people where they are. And it's not my responsibility to change anybody. Even, I was a pastoral counselor, with this ministry for a long time. And, and the best, and really the only thing you can do, is to just listen. But anyway, I went on a side quest there. Sorry about that. So anyway, but uh, so anyway, so I was dealing with all this, and I honestly was becoming very bitter, because I was expected to do so much and I just couldn't do it. And I was, you know, treated like I just wasn't doing a good job, or, whatever. And I knew I was doing as best as I could. Sorry. Gotta have my chapstick. And I honestly, and so even though I was, medicated, I was, for my ADHD, I was still very much in denial about the bipolar. Like, I really thought that I was just a very, emotional, and, again, just, that I just needed to rely on the Lord more, and, things like that. And I really, like, looking back, like, I really regret not dealing with that, because, during that time, like, I made a lot of really bad choices that not only affected me, but it affected the center, the ministry. It affected, everyone in my life. Um, and I was, eventually I was fired. And, and it was both absolutely devastating, but also, like, I felt so much relief. Like I felt like this huge weight was lifted off me, because I don't think I ever would have left on my own. Um, Even though I had so many issues with this ministry, and like so many things that I did not agree with, but I had finally been placed into a position where I was able to make positive changes, and and things like that, and uh, the leadership that was there actually appreciated that in me. Um, so I so when I came back here to Pensacola, because this is where most of my family lives, you know, and after I got fired, I didn't know like what I was gonna do with my life, because I had always figured I was gonna stay with this ministry like forever, and I ended up pretty much having a job before I even like moved back. And then I was a nanny for 4 years. And I loved that. Like it was the best job ever. And right before I moved to Oregon, just a little bit of backstory. I was also diagnosed with fibromyalgia, having fibromyalgia, and so that you know so just those three things, like each one really affects the other, and I feel like it just really exacerbates the other conditions like that much more. And so I'm gonna get into that in just a minute.